All right, everyone. Welcome to episode number 46 of Going Live with Good Soil. Emmett is at the All In Summit this week, so we are joined by special guest host Farzad Misbahi. Farzad, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. I did some push-ups before I came here to get nice and jacked like Emmett, and I hope to do Emmett proud. But yeah, thank you so very much. This is a great honor for me. I love your show. I love the audience and community you've created around yourselves, and I've learned a lot through you and Emmett. So I'm very excited to take part of the conversation with y'all, and hopefully I do good. So I'm looking forward to it.
No, absolutely. It was fun being on your channel a while back, and you're always very present in the comments here. So it's fun to have you up in person. One of the unfortunate things I think probably about this format is that you can get the questions up on stage, but you can't actually bring kind of guests into the studio necessarily. So it is kind of nice to get a different host up here. But welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very much looking forward to it.
So we usually start off the conversation talking kind of about macro markets and kind of what's going on with the broader stock market. The big news kind of last week in terms of macroeconomic news was the inflation print, which came in a little bit high, but mostly in line with the expectations. So that was the market can't seem to figure out what the heck to do with any of this macroeconomic information now. Stocks were continuing their significant nosedive essentially last week, and then strong recovery Friday. They kind of puked yesterday. There's a bit of a recovery today. It seems to be a bit of a yo-yo, but mostly in the downward direction. As you're kind of looking at this and observing, what's your take on kind of the current state of the markets and where we are, and just how do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, and I'm very curious to hear your perspective as well. But from my perspective, it just seems like the market is it goes back to the whole uncertainty principle of markets don't like uncertainty, and I think there's still a lot of that in the markets. If you look at today's movement, for example, this morning, like if I use Tesla and the Nasdaq, I think the Nasdaq was up like 2% at open. Tesla was up, I think, close to 3% or over 3%. And before I jumped on, I think Tesla was down to like 1%. So like it was selling off into whatever strength was there. So I'm wondering if that's sort of the new normal here for the next few months until there is confirmation of this recession that's actually happening. I feel like whatever strength exists in the market, folks are going to utilize that to cash out or try to maybe increase their cash reserves given the higher sort of interest rate environment that we're in now. I don't know if it's just purely a symptom of perhaps folks just feel safer having more cash on hand, knowing that interest rates are going to go up, and maybe they have, I don't know. It's tough to tell, to be completely honest. But I think to me, it's just yet again another sort of environment where uncertainty in the markets usually lends off to the sell-off sort of environment. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on the thing that seems to be like the prevailing theme over the past several years or months feels like years.
Yeah, right.
Just the fear and the kind of uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty at all. I mean, I remember back when there were all these fears back in February, which seems so long ago, of is Russia going to invade or are they not? And so markets were kind of plummeting on this uncertainty. And then when Russia finally did invade, which is like the worst news, markets actually rose on that news. Yeah. It's like, once there's kind of that certainty, even if it is bad news, markets tend to at least find some strength, and buyers tend to come back in. But markets are so just kind of beat up right now. I'm kind of curious that I follow a lot of like macro experts, and I put that in quotation marks because I think nobody really can predict macro. So I'm skeptical of anyone who kind of says that they're an expert at it. But I don't know if you're seeing the same thing in your kind of Twitter feed, but mine seems to be roughly a 50-50 split of people who say the sky is falling. We've only just kind of scratched the surface of how bad it's going to be. And other people saying there's reasonable evidence to suggest that we are at or near a bottom right now. So are you seeing that same sort of thing? And how do you think through that complicated question, which seems to have people very on opposing sides?
Yeah, that's a great question. I see the same exact behavior. I mean, even in my head, I have the same sort of thought process, right? And I'm not even, and just full disclosure, I'm not somebody who trades short-term movement. I'm a long-term investor. So when I think about putting money anywhere, my time horizon is 5 years plus, right? So whereas I think you and Emmett are much more well-versed in the sort of maybe shorter term type of environments. I do know also you guys are also very heavily skewed towards companies that have a lot of long term potential as well. But I think the way I think about it is like. I was thinking about this over the weekend. I don't know what it was. I think that the short term nature of the market is really a reflection of how badly people want rewards now because life is so finite. So I'm like trying to like take a philosophical approach to it to try and explain why this is happening. And I think that's a lot of it. I think it's hard to be patient, or it's hard to be sort of have a mentality where you want to have delayed gratification or delayed rewards based on some of the investments that you do now, because most people, including myself, I want everything now. Like I want it now. Who wouldn't want everything now? Life is short,
Mhm.
right? So when I think about the stock price movements, I kind of put it through that lens. But I think the really interesting thing, and I've heard you and Emma talk about this before, is like I wonder what the dynamic in the stock market's going to be if there is an event where the second quarter print comes out and it confirms a recession. I wonder if that is like the bottom. And then from that point forward, we can move ahead, because now people are like, okay, cool. We got confirmation that there's a recession. We sold off the stocks in preparation for this recession. Now that we have confirmation for it, we can start looking forward. We can start moving on. It's almost like if we get a print that says, no, the economy's fine, there's no recession, I wonder if that's worse for the stock market in a way. Because it's like you're kind of flip-flopping between quarters, and then folks are going to think, okay, maybe it's Q3 that will get the print for the recession, right? So
Mhm.
and that conversation you and Emmett had around like the recession marking, not necessarily marking the bottom, but almost being better psychologically, that there's a confirmation of this thing going on, could put some rest to the markets. What do you think?
Yeah. So on the one hand, I agree with you, but I also think that most of the commentators that I'm seeing right now believe that we are in the midst of a recession right now. So they are expecting Q2 kind of GDP print to be negative again, which would be the technical definition of a recession. When I'm kind of looking at what are people afraid of, I think the thing that they're more afraid of than like GDP contracting a little bit is inflation really getting away from us. So
Hmm.
in my mind, I think the better, not maybe not better, but the more uncertain indicator that we may or may not have reached a bottom is going to be, when do we turn the corner on kind of getting a lid on this inflation?
Hmm.
Because if we are 6-7 months from now, and we're still having 8% plus CPI prints, that puts a lot of pressure on the Fed to continue raising rates, which then drives further kind of downward pressure on the economy. So I'm a little bit more concerned about kind of CPI prints going forward than necessarily GDP, but I think they're both important to watch because they're certainly related.
So then, in your head, would you say that? And don't let me put words in your mouth, but kind of help me think through this thought process. So, would a like great case scenario in the event of a recession be that we have back to back prints of negative GDP with a lowering CPI rate? Like, is that an environment that you think will enable macro markets to sort of rebound and go back up? Is that how we should think
Yeah,
about this, or am I not thinking about this right?
I mean, so I'm not an economist. I got to be very clear about that. I'm
Of course.
much more kind of capable digging through an individual company's financials. But as I'm looking through everything right now, it does seem to me that that would be a kind of a very good indicator if we kind of confirm the GDP has slowed down a little bit, because people are concerned that the economy is just a little overheated, right? So a little negative GDP growth after the kind of crazy 2021 and frankly 2020 that we had wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And then, but I think if you have CPI kind of coming down in a substantial way, not necessarily going from like you know 8.1 to 8.0% or something like that, I don't think that'll necessarily calm anyone's fears. But if you start getting it down to like that 6, even 5% level, that would be, I think, a really good boost for stocks,
Yeah.
and to help people just kind of get the worst case scenario of like 6% interest rates out of their minds. I think that would help a
Right.
lot.
I think what's really interesting, and I don't know if you've seen this, or maybe the viewership has seen this, is that at least to me, and again, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I find the sort of dichotomy of what's going on really interesting, is that we live in an inflationary environment with higher interest rates. But if I look around, I live in Austin, but if I look around, like people are going out, people are
Yeah.
spending, people are traveling. So I wonder if there could be a situation where the Fed almost like are they even going to be able to stop this inflationary event from happening? Because there's just going to be so much demand out in the market from people looking to get back out there and spending again and traveling again because of the last, year and a half of sort of laws. Because I think there's a psychological aspect to this too, is that human beings want to be happy, and they've been sort of trapped in a house for a year and a half. And are you going to be able to even stop them? Like,
Yeah.
are human beings going out going to cause inflation anyway? Like, I don't know. Help me think through that, because I don't know if that's the right way of thinking about it. But I feel like if human beings are going to human being, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I
Sure.
don't know what you think
So,
about that.
um, I think Austin may not necessarily be representative of the
True.
broader economy, because I mean it's such a hot spot right now.
True.
And just a quick comment, boil down in the comments says, how can people be concerned that the economy is overheated when it's in a recession? I may have misspoke. I don't remember exactly how I phrased that, but I was more talking about being overheated in 2021 when there was all this money printing coming in. So the economy probably grew much faster than it otherwise would have because of all the liquidity that was put into the system. So that, prompted a lot of spending and, increased supply or increased demand, so much so that, supply couldn't really keep pace. But now, Farzad, to your question, I think people do have a little bit of that pent up, demand and the GDP print for Q1. I wish I could remember the exact details, but consumer spending was actually pretty solid, as I recall. One of the biggest things that kind of came down was inventory purchases from businesses, which does kind of make sense given all the supply chain concerns going on. So I do think there's still a little bit of uncertainty around the specific nature of the kind of current economic environment we're in. Are consumers really feeling the pinch of inflation such that like they're having trouble filling their gas tanks and they don't want to go out, or do they have enough kind of excess liquidity that they can kind of go out and continue to spend, because our economy really is highly kind of consumer spending centric.
Yeah.
So I'm more on the camp, I think, that consumers are starting to feel the pinch. I mean, I think last month there was a huge uptick in consumer debt. So consumers had been saving quite a little bit. You saw the savings rate, I think it was in April, plummet. Consumer debt, like credit card, really roared up. I don't remember the exact figure, but quite substantially. So that's potentially, if that trend persists, then that could be indicative that consumers don't have a lot of kind of spare wallet to go out and spend on vacations and on dining and that sort of thing. But let's move on to maybe greener pastures, probably more interesting things. We mentioned Emmett was at the All In Summit, and yesterday Elon had I think it was a pretty fascinating interview there with the guys at the All In Summit. Did you have a chance to listen to that, Farzad? And what were your kind of thoughts, if so?
I did. Yeah, I watched it before I went to bed last. So I saw I knew that was going on, and then I was like, I'm kind of like, I'm gonna go to bed soon. Let me see what's on YouTube. And then the All In podcast came up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So I put it on. It was about an hour and a half. To me, that was I think my favorite part of that interview was how comfortable Elon was, and how much he seemed like a regular person on it that was talking about really interesting stuff. And I think that's extremely powerful, because you kind of get insights into much more clear insights into how he thinks, how he likes to communicate, how he thinks, but in a very comfortable setting, the sort of topics he would bring up. It just seemed like five dudes just talking, like recollecting their business dealings and sort of like talking to each other, where we all got to see it together. I thought there were some cool little gems that were dropped through that entire interview, but I really enjoyed it. It was probably top 2, top 3 interviews for me, if not definitely the most entertaining. I would say I was by far the most. I was like cracking up in the first 5 minutes, because they're just shooting the stuff basically in the first few minutes. I'm not gonna curse. I promise.
How dare you? How dare you?
Yeah. But
no,
it was
yeah. I was astonished at how loose he was. I was like,
yeah.
Did he have a couple drinks before this interview?
You were like, was he drunk?
He has this tendency, which I really love in most interviews, where he's very he's thinking in depth. So he'll have these very long pauses as he's contemplating the question, and like almost like just sending his logic into overgear to be like, how can I answer this in the most logical way possible? And he
Yeah,
wasn't doing that this time around. He was just kind of like off the cuff, just like going, and
I
he was
loved
like
it.
a comedian. He was like
Yeah.
he was really holding the stage quite effectively. I thought I was really cracking up at some of the stuff, and I was frankly surprised that he went some of the places that he went. I mean, Twitter's essentially accusing him of breaking the non-disclosure agreement, and there he is, like, ripping on Parag and talking about how they've got this huge bot issue. Were
Yeah.
you surprised at kind of how free with some of those details he was?
I think, the one comment he's made in the past is, especially recently, was that sunshine is the best disinfectant, And I think the way Elon approaches life, from what I'm noticing, is that he applies that thought process everywhere. So which makes him very unorthodox, right? You would think in a 99.9999% of the other dealings that happen in business, this stuff is behind closed doors
Yeah,
between the board, the executives, and the investors, and whoever's looking to buy you. No one gets a sniff of what's going on. You just hear rumors, Elon's like, yep, this is what's happening, and this is what I think about it, and this is what they're telling me, and this is what's going on. This is why I think they're wrong. You know what I'm saying? So it's very, very interesting. And I think in the case of Twitter, this puts them in a deep lose-lose situation if they don't move forward to the deal with the
oh
deal. And
yeah,
and the it's if you don't take the deal, you lose out on a premium that Elon's offering you for the stock. Oh, and by the way, all these questions that are coming up are going to really continue to erode the trust that the user base has with your platform. And there's going to be there's going to be less transparency from the company that even previously thought, which is going to encourage people to leave, and it's going to give ammunition for a competitor to come in and step in with the variables that Twitter lacks, in this case transparency and really heavy duty tools around bots. So
yeah.
he's, and I don't know if this is sort of like a 5D chess move by Elon, and negotiating, because you think about the innovative ways that he approaches his companies. This is sort of like an innovative way of haggling, if you really think about it. This is like, I'm going to make it public. I don't care. What are you going to do? Sue me? I
Well,
have $250 billion. I don't know.
I think it's even worse than that, though, because it's not just the users who are, kind of upset about this. It's like it's the advertisers, which is the core of their business model. So he's saying, no, you may have been lied to. Every single advertising agent or brand that's spending money on Twitter. You may be thinking that you're getting 95% of your ad spend is being seen by humans. The actual figure may be only 50%.
Yeah,
So like he's kind of leaving that out there, and it's kind of like I was thinking this. It's like he fired a torpedo, and he can like choose whether or not he detonates it or not. So
exactly.
if the thing just like breaks apart, I'm sure he'll come up with some kind of evidence that the bots are bigger than they're saying, and like Twitter could actually like self-destruct if this problem is as serious as he's claiming it is.
Yeah,
And that could be a huge issue for their financial health, on top of the bot problem just being a user base issue. So to me, it was kind of
absolutely.
like he was giving himself the flexibility to, he even talked about going and starting a different platform and how that might be easier. And so if he kind of
Yeah.
torpedoes Twitter on his way out, that may make it a little bit easier to get some momentum on the outset, both in terms of kind of revenue generation from advertisers, but hopefully users switching over as well. But
Yeah,
I was shocked
it's
that
a
he discussed that
very
openly.
yeah, it's super hardcore. I mean, it's super hardcore, and it really, I mean, one could really make the argument of like, why, so like, how much freedom would you have how would you have had to do this due diligence before you put in an offer? You know what I'm saying? So like, how come this wasn't one of the questions you asked before you went and offered 44 billion, But again, I don't know, I don't know how much incentive Twitter would have under that, in that scenario, to say, hey, here's the true metrics of it, because in the deal they're not being transparent, or so Elon says, about what percentage of the user base is bought. So if they don't even have a deal in the works, what's Twitter's incentive to be forthright about their bot percentage? In the event that if it is higher than 5%, what you just described, the entire advertising model collapses dramatic. It just becomes an overnight implosion of the company. Because you've, and so I saw somebody in the comments, I think Martin said, if Elon's right, won't Twitter be sued like crazy? I mean, I don't know what you think, but probably, right? Because, you're essentially misleading every single advertiser you have had on your platform under that respect.
Yeah, I mean, like I could see Twitter being sued like crazy. I could see Elon also being sued by
Yeah.
Twitter like crazy.
Yeah.
Like it'd be a
But
hot
he can
mess. And
afford it. That's the thing.
that, that
Yeah.
that is the thing. Like he can afford it, and he he really means it when he says that he values the reality of doing good more than the perception of doing good. So I think he kind of views hashing this issue out as kind of a greater good for society. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I don't know. Like the 5% number when I first heard that, I was like, "There's no way that's true."
There's no way.
I,
There's no
I
way.
don't think it's 50% necessarily, but I don't think it's 5%. That just
So
seems like
I did some rough math on one of the tweets that Parag sent out. So Parag sent that, hey, there's we get rid of about 500,000 bots a day that people don't even realize, or we basically get rid of them immediately. And then there's about 2 million users a week that we cancel that kind of get through that sort of filter. If you add those out and you extrapolate it out to a quarterly number, that's like 71 million bot accounts that are created each quarter
oh
on a
my
user
gosh.
base of 229 million. And that's probably the lower case, right? Because he says over half a million, and he said millions of accounts get suspended each week, which I said too, because that's
That's
technically
crazy.
millions, but it could be 7. I don't freaking know, right? So
Yeah.
like put that in perspective. Like this bot thing, like that 5% number could be the case. Like maybe the way they're thinking about it is like, okay, 5% of active bot users that we haven't caught yet in a low case scenario, if our tools are perfect and we execute on it at 100%. You know what I'm saying? So it's very, man, it's like just Parag making those numbers public. I feel like already like adds a little bit of a dimension that says maybe Elon's right. Because if you take the 71 million users that get blocked and you divide it by the 230 some odd million users on Twitter, that's 31%. So of course
Mhm.
you catch them, but those 71 million users could have influenced something before they got caught. It's a huge problem. It's a
Yeah.
huge problem. It's a
And
huge problem.
with the scale of figures you just put out there, I mean, you'd only have to miss, a very small percentage of those bots on like a weekly basis for the cumulative kind of number to spike way higher than 5%. So
Right.
to me, it almost seems unlikely that the numbers Prague set out there about how many accounts they clean out um, would be accurate, and that the 5% number could be accurate, because you have to have like a 99% accuracy rate in order for like the cumulative number that kind of slip through your net
I
to not
agree.
exceed 5% of the total monthly daily active users. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. I like Elon putting that poop emoji out there. I was like, wow, this could be legal trouble for him. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, I'm
Unorthodox.
sure he's right. It's definitely unorthodox. Yeah.
Unorthodox for damn sure. I think the other thing too is like how much, you think about how close Elon is to the details of the companies that he runs. How close is Parag to the details of the company that he runs? So is the
Yeah.
5% number given to him by the lead of the data, the BI division, the business intelligence
Hmm.
division, that's saying it's 5%. I'm sure it's right. But then is that guy, did the team make a mistake and now they're trying to cover their butts basically? Like this happens in
Yeah.
corporate America all the
Oh,
time.
for sure.
All
Yeah.
the time. So why wouldn't it happen in Twitter? And again, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just like
Sure.
walking through 80% of the time, people will cover their butts if they generated data that is incorrect, and they'll double down to say, hey, this is right, because they don't want to be caught, making a mistake. And then sometimes they they sort of, they prolong this lie, for self-preservation versus having the truth. And again, I'm not saying this is the case, but this happens more likely than not. And so from a
Yeah.
statistical perspective, it's more likely than not than the folks that have been feeding the data could have made a mistake by a factor of 10. I don't know. And when you're dealing with
Yeah.
millions and millions and millions of bots, to your point, man, that bot number could be big real quick.
Yeah. Well, and Elon made a point which I think is true, where, if your advertising revenue is contingent on having, a low percentage of bots, maybe you
Yeah.
don't want to look too closely. Maybe you don't want the most accurate methodology. I mean, that's a kind of you can understand not wanting to dig into that question too much. I'm not saying that Twitter did do that, but the incentive is definitely there for them to not look too closely if the problem really is that big.
Yeah. And
So
someone else put a comment too, like, what shocks me is Jack Dorsey. Surely he knew about all this. Martin posted it in the comments. And like, where's Jack in all this? Like, has he defended Parag? Like, is he coming out and saying Elon's right? Like, he's been absent on this, which I think is yet another layer that says, okay, what's going on here? You know?
yeah, I mean, like thinking about Jack, it seems like he's ideologically closer to Elon than to Parag, but it seems like I don't know, he didn't have the backbone or the willpower, I guess, to kind of fight these battles internally. So
You know?
I don't know. Jack's kind of an interesting character in my mind, but definitely doesn't seem to have the kind of managerial chops and kind of willingness to dig into these nitty gritty, nasty details the way that Elon does. So
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Very few people do. Very few people do. I think
No,
that's what set Elon's
like
apart.
nobody does, like to
Yeah.
his level, to be honest with you.
Super
But
rare.
let's move on to Tesla. A lot of
Yeah.
talk. One of the other comments that Elon made at this All In Summit was, the 1 million FSD users by the end of this year. I mean, that was kind of a rough approximation, so we don't necessarily need to hold them to it, But
Right.
I think that was a larger number than most people were expecting. I'm wondering what was your thought on that and kind of the broader kind of FSD timeline that he keeps reiterating.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of I think FSD will reach level 4 by the end of this year, and we'll start seeing some sort of Tesla network type activity probably by the beginning of next year. So I do buy into the fact that FSD will be at the point of essentially completion, and from that point forward is that again that sort of like go from 99.99 to 99.999, so on and so forth, and expand it to other regions as well. That million number, I think, fits within that scale. I think a lot of that includes the assumed expansion of the FSD beta plus an additional take rate of full self-driving as it becomes better and better and more people get exposed to it over time. So I think, he said 100,000 right now. He factors it by 10 by the end of the year because he thinks there's going to be some sort of exponential improvement from here to there, given with the data that he's seeing internally. Also, my thing is like Elon going after Twitter and Karpathy going on sabbatical are indications that, hey, FSD is done and it's just a matter of just getting there, right? So I think it's just a bullish sign that FSD is going to be ready this year.
Yeah.
So that's
I
my
did see
take.
your video on FSD being done, and it was really interesting. I think I'm in a slightly different camp than you. Like in my mind, they really need to get single stack figured out, and sounds like they're well on their way. I mean, this new version, which is allegedly coming this week to the beta testers, is a step in that direction. He says,
Yeah.
and then it sounds like 10.12. I think that was the right number. Is probably going to be single stack, although he didn't really confirm that.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, to me, once you kind of get to that single stack, which they're not there yet, so that you got all these different neural nets doing, highway driving versus city street driving, and like parking lots are still a total mess.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that in my mind that still needs to kind of be worked out. But in my mind, once you get it onto the single stack, then the iteration process should be a lot more rapid than what we've seen maybe over the last couple of months.
Right.
But you are a beta tester, right?
I am.
And what's your experience been in the last month or so, and what's the kind of rate of improvement been like for you, kind of
The
current
the
state
la-
and then rate of improvement?
Yeah, the latest update was a significant improvement from the previous 10 dot. I forget what the version I'm on. I'm on the one right before this one that's about to release, whatever
Yeah.
10, 12, 10, 11. I don't even know what the number system is. I'm so confused by it. But there was a market improvement from the previous version. It was way more confident, especially in taking left turns in certain situations.
Yeah.
I felt like it picked lanes much better in city driving. It felt a lot more natural as well. So it behaved much more human-like. However, in situations where you still have like poor lane markings and construction, if those two things are combined, the car will hesitate for sure. But what's really interesting is that it's getting to the point now where whenever I have throttle input with the full self-driving, whenever we're doing full self-driving, I'm doing barely any wheel adjustments, and it's
Mhm.
just a throttle adjustment, which to me, I think is the vector for safety. They probably have it much more conservative than AKA it needs, potentially needs to be, but I completely understand why they're doing that. And so the route that the car's taking is it's way more correct as it's gone on. to the point where I think it's almost there. Now it's just a matter of doing the accelerator and braking input to make it much more natural, outside of a couple scenarios here and there. So I've seen market improvement. I'm excited to see this latest version. And if you think about where it was versus last year, it's so much better. It's so much better. And
Yeah.
so, with the additional fleet and the data coming in, I think we're going to see continued improvements. But what do you think? What kind of behaviors have you seen?
Yeah, pretty similar experience, although slightly different in the specifics, I'd say. So, this latest 10.11.2 is what somebody's saying of the version that we're on is. That was like 10 steps forward for me. Like I'd been having a pretty horrible beta experience, to be honest with you. It was always more of a like hassle to have it on than to, not, but I did it anyways because track the progress and see how it's doing and follow it. But it was always like I would just get annoyed at how bad it was.
Sure.
But this latest version, it was like every single problem that I had on a regular basis was gone, and it was just
Fantastic.
handling turns way more smoothly. Now, like in the last month or so since I first got the update, I'm noticing its flaws a little bit more. And one of the ones that I find a little bit strange is like if you're turning left and there's heavy traffic, every once in a while it'll do this thing where like the pedal will like, or the brake pedal will like jerk like on and off a bunch of times, and it'll just kind of creep forward, and I'm like, no, it should not be creeping, and then eventually it kind of runs out of place. It's like in the lane essentially, and it just continues to creep, and I'm like, no, that's a problem. But I think that as I'm thinking about, it's still using the video frames or the like photo frames instead of a live video architecture, which is going to be in the single stack version. So I would think that kind of more of an emphasis on the time series of the information coming in from the cameras would help a lot with that particular issue. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm really looking forward to this next version and kind of seeing what the rate of improvement looks like from here.
For sure. Yeah, it's just a confidence factor, right? The speed of the car is 100% based on safety. So it's like how safe do I feel going through this intersection? I'm not an AI expert, but I mean conceptually, I think that makes sense, right? So I think once the safety confidence goes up of that movement, that's when you start having sort of that creep motion and the sort of hesitancy to move through an intersection start to go down, and then you'll have much more assertive driving. Because if you really think about it, the safest drivers are the most assertive ones, and are the ones that are the most easy to predict what they're going to do. And to be easily predictable, you have to be assertive about your movements. Not being assertive, everybody hates you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch, and I do think that I'm confident that they'll get there. And I think once they do, it's going to be quite transformational.
I think so too. And I'm very curious to see what the earnings prints look like later this year, because one of the things I keep tweeting about this, and we put in our investor letter for Q1. They had in their investor presentation for Q1 this note that they expect software margins to contribute more significantly going forward, even though they expect their hardware margins are going to continue to improve as well with things like cell to pack and 4680s and all these, or not structural cell, not cell to pack, sorry. So like the fact that they actually put that in investor materials makes me think that they really, coupled with Elon's comment of 1 million beta testers by the end of the year, really makes me think that they've got strong data points suggesting a very rapid increase in kind of FSD sales going forward. And the margin implications for that are really drastic. I think more drastic than people realize. So that's something that has me really excited about even the near term, the medium term, the next 3-4 quarters. As uncomfortable as the kind of Tesla stock price is right now, where it is, I looking forward at the potential is just so exciting, I think.
I think really the key thing to think about there is that, you're essentially by Q4, you're going to be close to doubling your quarterly volume once Austin and Berlin are close to being ramped up, right? So that's double the car volume with a higher percentage take rate of full self-driving. So say you go from 10 to 20%. I don't know where they're at now, 10%, 20%, whatever that number is. If you assume that full self-driving is going to go out to 1 million people in the beta release, that assumes much higher take rate. Assume that the take rate doubles, and then the volume of cars also double. That's a 4x. That's a
Yeah.
4x in the profit you're going to get from full self-driving, right? It's just simple math when you walk through
Yeah.
it, you know?
Well, it's actually higher than that because right now the FSD is only about 50% recognizable.
You're
So
right.
if they make that 100%
8x.
recognizable, then that turns into an 8x. And like
Exactly.
nobody's modeling
Exactly.
it this way. It's crazy to me
Right.
that no, like Wall Street analysts, with the exception of Alex Potter, I think he's the only one that's actually modeling out FSD separately with all the assumptions and the percent that's deferred. So
Yeah.
um when I'm looking at these analyst projections for the next couple of years, I think they're completely missing the boat. I mean, I think they're probably low, even if you're just looking at only automotive margins, like from their manufacturing capabilities. But when you start layering in at FSD, I think it's going to be a real potential game changer. Now,
Yeah. And then
is Elon going to deliver on time? He's been late on this
right,
for like
exactly.
years, so it's possible
Exactly.
that it's just late.
Exactly. And here's the thing, if the price remains in the same sort of level by then, if profits from full self-driving do 8x by Q4, call it, and say the Tesla stock price remains around this time, at what point does the Tesla PE sort of ratio and the way people think about the company, at what point does it go from a growth play to like a strict value play, because they're generating so
Yeah.
much profit through their, like, at some point the stock price has to go up. It just has to go up because it wouldn't make any sense. They'll be making way too much money. They'll be making
Yeah.
way too much money.
Yeah. I mean, even in
Like
this
a
is
Home
what
Depot.
kind of gives us the
Yeah.
you mentioned at the outset, Emmett and I played in the shorter term a little bit more just with our use of options. Now, our shorter term
Yeah.
is, we have leaps that go out to 2024 for the most part. That's our kind of biggest holding right now in the fund. But, you look at the like implications for those earnings. Like if the numbers really do come in kind of where we're expecting, then you could have significant multiple compression, which we're already seeing. And if
Right.
they're producing, like, my base case assumption is like $25 in EPS for next year, for 2023. And so, like, you can run some numbers on like what the price to earnings will be and what the peg ratio is. And it's like, if you want a flight to safety because you're afraid of the kind of current environment, well, like if Tesla's trading at a PE of say like 40 or 50 in the future, just with like flat stock price and rapidly increasing earnings, well, the flight to safety is going to be a rapidly growing tech company, growing earnings 50% to 100% in year over year, with like the best technology in the world it has a total addressable market drastically bigger than even just the automotive market, and which is priced like a value stock at like a PE
Right.
in the 10s or 20s. That's I think just
Yeah.
it's a great setup if we're right about this.
With unlimited demand, essentially, in a recession, which in an industry that's typically heavily impacted by recessions, and this company has literally unlimited demand. How, like, what, I'm biased, but I, like, again, like, you keep throwing these
Yeah,
variables out there, it's just
it's
very
it's
interesting to watch.
true right now. I mean, a lot of the skeptics out there say, okay, well, they're going to have to lower prices, or demand's not going to be this long forever, and that could be the case. But if you look at the net promoter score and the fact that they're doing all this without advertising, so okay, maybe they have to spend a
Exactly.
little bit on advertising in the future in order to get to say 5 million units. All right, that's not the end of the world. Like, there's so many levers they haven't even started to pull yet. Not to mention, it's almost a moot point if they solve autonomy, and then the economics of the opportunity will kind of dictate sales.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily, it's like you don't need to look at the current state of the market and to kind of extrapolate that forward.
Right.
Um,
And I
so
always get
yeah,
so
it's
scared when I feel this bullish too, because I'm like, okay, what am I missing? Like, what am I missing? Because I feel very bullish right now about where the
yeah,
stock price is, like super bullish. And I'm like, okay, what am I missing here? What's going on? I have to ensure I'm not in an echo chamber. I have to make sure that I'm not I'm not giving too much credit to the full self-driving thing being done, that I'm, I don't know, maybe we live in a new time where price multiple ratios are going to go down dramatically, and it is not recession proof. We are going to have some issues, but I just don't see it. I just don't see it. In a recession, I think electric vehicles are going to get a gigantic demand boost from governments anyway, because that's where we're going. So like, even in an environment where we have a heavy recession, God forbid a depression, electric vehicles are going to be the ones that are going to be incentivized to be sold, because that is the new technology and it's renewable, and that's what's hot. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's like, I don't know, man. I'm just
yeah.
scared that I'm this bullish.
So I hear you, and I always try to kind of steel man, the best possible argument against Tesla, and I've done that, I think, with an open mind. And time and again, and just as Tesla continues to just shock on their manufacturing efficiency. It's just like the bull case is actually stronger now than it was when I kind of went all in a couple of years ago. So that has me excited. S2K does say all cars are sold out now, not just Teslas, and I think that's true. You're certainly seeing just a demand higher than supply right now. But part of the reason for that being the case is that all the traditional OEMs are cutting production because they got major supply chain issues. So like you look at Toyota, Ford, GM, they're all cutting production. Like their production in Q1 was drastically lower than it was a year ago. So Tesla's got a backlog of like 6 months roughly. They had inventory of like 2 days on hand at the end of the quarter, something ridiculous like that. So I think it's true that there's some macro issues kind of pushing this situation, but I do think Tesla's situation is markedly different than the other OEMs.
But and then you throw in the gas price too, the gas price variable now. Like my dad it literally is getting a Tesla Model 3 next week because diesel costs are so high. He's much more price sensitive. And, if my dad is dropping his Volkswagen Jetta TDI diesel for a Tesla Model 3, everything has flipped because he's one of the last people that would do that because he loves his diesel cars because he gets really good gas mileage. And now he's like, no, I bought a Tesla because he's 62 and he loves his diesels and he's getting a Tesla. That to me is an indicator that the game has changed. But anyway, I know we're probably going over stuff right now.
No, it's also interesting. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but let's open it up to Q&A and
5-hour podcast. Let's go.
All right. Underdog Investing says, how do you expect China sales will affect Q2 numbers, and how do you feel it will affect the Tesla stock price and investor sentiment? What do you think, Farzad?
Yeah, I think the guidance that we got from Tesla and Elon was that they think they can potentially match Q1 deliveries in Q2, either through some sort of higher mix out of the US or Shanghai is going to come back much stronger than people are thinking. I'm curious how much of that is already priced into the stock right now, where folks think that Shanghai is going to be a drag on the quarterly report for the second quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Tesla, if there's a company that can overcome those kinds of challenges and try to eke out as much demand as humanly as have as many sales as humanly possible in a quarter as Tesla. If you really think about it, Q4 and Q1 they went away from their what they call the sort of like end of quarter pushes, and they went to more traditional way of selling cars, which with less of a push. I lived through those end of quarter pushes while I worked there. They are awful. I hate them so much, but I'm glad that they did it at that time. So I'm curious if they bring back that sort of mentality for the second quarter, if that's what's required to get back to the sort of Q1 levels, and maybe that's what Elon's thinking. But I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be achievable. It's all dependent on how that China team really executes. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think a miss is widely expected. I think both on Wall Street and on like within the Tesla community. Troy Tesla, he's been posting his numbers for a while. I think I don't remember his exact number, but he's great, and I think he's expecting something like a 50,000 unit reduction Q2 over Q1, which kind of makes sense. And so as I've run the numbers, on my own. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold a little bit, so sorry about that. But I've run the numbers myself, and I'm struggling to come up with any reasonable scenario where Q2 is at or really even near, say, within 10,000 units or so of Q1's numbers. So if they can somehow pull that off, I think that would be a huge, rallying moment for the stock price. So that would imply that Shanghai production is drastically higher, like you mentioned. And I think it would have to be, they were talking about expanding Shanghai in Q1, and that kind of got shelved. So maybe they're kind of doing that more quietly now than we thought. That's possible. Or Berlin and Austin and Fremont are ramping higher than people expected. So I struggle to see how that would happen, like I said. So I'm not really putting a whole lot of weight in that. But, Wall Street right now is at, 226 of adjusted EPS, which is, like $1 down from where they were in Q1. So in my mind, kind of expectations are reasonable. I think both the bulls and Wall Street, like I said, are expecting a pretty decent step back, but also recognizing that, that there's reasons to explain that. And then in my mind, if Elon's right and somehow they do pull this miracle out, like I was shocked at the numbers in Q1, honestly. So if they can pull out some miracle like that and they get anything close to 300,000 units and $3 plus of earnings per share, like that would be just like a huge boost to the stock, I would think.
Yeah.
So I'm not banking on that at all, to be clear. But if it does happen, I could see that really kind of turning the tide on this negative stock price pressure we've seen.
Yeah, it does seem this like the stock has a lot of negative news baked into it already, given the macro and Shanghai and this whole Twitter thing, right? There's no recognition of full self-driving, I would
Right.
say. So any sort of positive news, I would think, would help the stock go up in the future, but what do I know? So, yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, Thaddeus Walker says, Farzad, how does your sabbatical theory fit with Operation Vacation? Is it possible that the milestone is automated data entry and not FSD?
That's a great question. In my mind, those two are the same thing. Those two are the same thing because full self-driving requires data for it to be uh, where it needs to be. If you think about a lot of the mainframe work that has to be done to ensure that the data that has to be taken in automatically are you're capable to do it. That implies that the mainframe or whatever is around that automated data system is done for that to work. So it implies more than just automated data systems. It implies that you have a system past that, the next process that allows you to take that massive inflow of data into the system that will help move full self-driving forward. And if we're working within a neural net sort of environment, that means that the system is data is what's going to make it improve. It's not going to be sitting down and coding some lines. It's going to be, yep, just feed it data, feed it data, feed it data. So that to me implies many, many things. I could be 100% wrong, but to me,
So
those two things go hand in hand. What do you think?
I had been thinking Operation Vacation was going to be, kind of at the point at which, Dojo's kind of up and running and they've got automated labeling and that sort of thing, which in my mind is kind of like late next year, if not even later than that potentially. But
Mhm.
so do you distinguish between, like truly you don't need any engineers at all anymore because it's all kind of automated with the system and maybe just a little troubleshooting here and there versus I think where they are right now where they've made a lot of strides but they clearly have a labeling team still and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way Tesla works is they're always going to work to make it better regardless. So they're always going to
Yeah.
have some percentage of the workforce working on optimizing the system and bettering the way they automate the data and bettering the way that they collect the data. That work is always going to continue. But if you think of it from a Pareto approach, if the biggest bottleneck is going to be getting the data, the largest amount of data into the system to be processed to better full self-driving, if that's the thing that's done, the periphery doesn't matter. Like that's the
Mhm.
bottleneck. You know what I'm saying? So that's how I
Yeah.
think about it. So the 20% I don't care about. If the 80%'s done, good. Let's move
Yeah.
forward. The 20% is just it's just what you pay to do business, and that's Tesla's DNA. That's what they do.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next question. All right, David says, what about a historically unprecedented collapse of the dollar as predicted by Ray Dalio in Principles for a Changing World Order? What would happen to Tesla if this happens? So, far as that, I don't know, maybe first of all, do you think that's a reasonable assumption or at least scenario to go down the track of? And then if so, what do you think happens to Tesla?
So this is by the farthest away from my area of expertise. So I'm going to sound like a dummy when I talk about this, but the way I think about it is that I feel like too much of the world's economy is dependent on the dollar. And if the dollar collapses, Tesla going down is probably the least of our worries. I think we would have societal collapse in some way. We would essentially have a hammer taken to civilization, and we have to figure out how to rebuild from there. Or there's an I feel like there's too much being done in dollars, and if that collapses, a lot of things are in trouble. That could be the rise of crypto. I have no freaking idea, but I think about it very simplistically. So where my wet brain went to as I read that was like, I don't even worry about Tesla. I worry about civilization at that point. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it would necessarily like if the dollar collapses or let's say the yuan became the reserve currency or Bitcoin or what like pick your poison. I don't know that it would necessarily be the collapse of civilization. I think it would certainly be bad. But I kind of like to think of it as trying to. There's reason to hedge your own exposure to the dollar. So like our entire economic lives are denominated in dollars. So they're like I have a little bit of cryptocurrency exposure, and I've been concerned about this for like over a decade. So my 401k actually is almost entirely international equities just because I wanted to hedge against the dollar deflating. Now that's never happened, but I suspect that sometime over the course of my working career, the dollar will devalue relative to the other currencies of the world, just because there's no real plan to address our kind of continued deficit spending. The CBO put out a pretty damning report about this. I think it was yesterday, which is just saying like, we have no plan on how to address the deficit, and we're going to have to either cut spending or increase taxes in order to make the system sustainable in the long term. And Elon talks about this too. And so I think the pressures are building. The dollar is actually strengthening right now in this current environment. So I would not try to predict when that might happen. But getting back to the original question, sorry, that's just a little personal tangent there. But I think the benefit Tesla has is that they're already diversifying in their currency. So they have exposure to the yuan in China, both with their cost inputs and their revenue within China. Those are denominated in yuan. And now they're building out Berlin, which is going to be euro denominated, both cost and revenues. So they're going to be diversifying their exposures. And they're taking merch and Dogecoin, right? And they've got a little Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So I think Tesla is actually probably going to be better exposed or better able to manage kind of currency exposure than a lot of other companies for that reason.
Yeah. I think one of the other things to think about too in that scenario, like what percentage chance do you give Tesla to add to their balance sheet more Bitcoin through these next couple quarters as their cash flow generation is massive, and they're looking to further diversify their balance sheet, and the fact that crypto like Bitcoin's like what, under 30 right now. I think that's another variable we have to think about as well, because that could very well happen too.
Yeah, it could be. And like they've got another. This is one of the news reports that kind of flew under the radar. They've got like an Ethereum backed loan that they took out for some service centers. It's like $8 million or something. So I think it's probably best to think of it as a pilot project. But they're doing a lot of stuff in the crypto world. It seems to be increasing, even though the Gary Blacks of the world, who I've got a huge amount of respect for, but he just wants them to be done with cryptocurrency and hates it. And I get his point, and it probably is a distraction from like the institutional point of view. But I don't think Elon cares about that. I think he's saying with a small percentage of our balance sheet, it's prudent to kind of diversify our currency risk. And I think that's a reasonable point of view.
Yeah, the guy that's going to air the dirty laundry from their dealings with Tesla will for sure be open to investing in crypto. That's just what you get. That's what you get with the company. By the way, I love Gary is the most savage financial analyst on Twitter. Shout out to Gary.
100%.
I love him. He's so
Gary's
good.
Great.
He's so funny too. He's so sarcastic sometimes too.
He is.
I love him.
All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, Martin says, sorry, my voice is giving out. Matt, any thoughts on Rocket Lab's earnings last night? So Rocket Labs announced their earnings again last night. I forget the exact figures, but it was something like 126% revenue growth year over year, and they're guiding for something it's like 30 or 40% revenue growth next quarter. The thing Rocket Lab, I think, doesn't get enough credit for is they've got this crazy financial discipline. Peter Beck reminds me a lot of Elon in that regard, that, he is just running the ship so lean right now. So like one of the things that kind of blew my mind is they're building this huge new launch facility in Wallops, Virginia. And they also just introduced a new launch pad, a brand new launch pad, essentially like doubling or tripling, I think, their launch capability if you include the Wallops facility. But they built a brand new launch pad. I think it was in Q1, and their CapEx, their capital investment, so like all the money that they're spending on new investments to fund the future, was $7 million. And I'm like, how do you build a new launch pad? Now, granted, they didn't build an entire launch pad just in one quarter, but they're really like rushing towards the future, both on a technological standpoint, and like in terms of building out new features, but they're doing it on a shoestring budget, and that's like what Elon does. Going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I had an interview with Warren Redlick talking about like Lucid and Rivian, and these companies have gross margins that are like negative 100, no, negative like 400 to 500%. That's completely unsustainable. Rocket Lab is out there, with kind of guiding towards long-term 30% gross margins, and they're pretty close to that right now. They kind of bounce up and down. So they've got a business model that makes a lot of sense from the technology perspective. Their backlog is growing like crazy. They got a $500 million plus backlog, and it's growing, and they're increasing revenue like crazy. So this one, I really believe in the future of this company. I don't know how long it's going to take for the market to kind of wise up that this really is a sustainable business. But I think it's at some point in the next several years, I think they're going to turn the corner on like profitability and cash flow, and their longer term business plan of like launching a constellation to provide services back to Earth is going to become a little bit more apparent. And I think when that happens, they're going to get a valuation premium. And the only other thing I would say is a lot of people tend to view them only as a launch provider and kind of think that's either a commodity or SpaceX is going to run them into the ground with Starship. But more than half their revenue actually comes from selling components. So they're selling components on SpaceX launches. They're selling, components on. It was like more than half of all launches had a Rocket Lab component on it somewhere or software. So they're actually diversified away from only launch. So I'm super bullish on them, and they just continue to perform, and eventually, I think they're gonna catch up. Curious, Farzad, do you follow Rocket Lab at all, or do you have any thoughts?
I don't. I very at the periphery, like super, like just like, hey, like that's another rocket company that seems to be doing good stuff, and I not super close to their financials. The only comment I would offer is that space doesn't seem like a winner takes all economy. It seems like a economy at its infancy that has unlimited potential. So I would say that there's probably going to be multiple players in it. And if there is a company that seems to be executing at a high level and is offering a competitive product, it would seem like a wise investment. But that's just at the top line. So that's all I have to offer there.
Yeah, no, the total market cap of all space companies is got to be less than $200 billion, because it's like SpaceX is 100 plus, and then there's like seemingly 30 of these companies that's valued at like $1 billion, something like that.
Right.
And with how quickly that industry is growing, like I can't imagine in 10 years from now, they're like the total market cap is going to be only 300 billion. Like I think it's going to be over $1 trillion. And I think Rocket Lab's like the clear number 2 right now.
Yeah.
So,
and even if SpaceX has 800 billion of that, Rocket Labs could have 100 billion. So what is that in comparison to the current market cap, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked about this in the past, but like SpaceX has one very particular mission, and Rocket Lab has a very different mission, kind of more focused on providing services to Earth. So I think there's going to be plenty of room for them to both kind of fulfill their individual missions and be crazy successful. So I'm really excited to watch this sector play out.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next question. Investing Against the Grain says, Matt, based on your usage of FSD beta, when do you think better than a human happens?
Shout out to Nicholas Gibbs. He's the host of the channel. He's awesome. I really like him.
Excuse me. I've had this cold for like a week, and I keep thinking it's the last day, and it just lingers.
Gotta eat some oranges, bro.
Yeah. Get that good
what
juju.
Y'all should call them jujus. Yeah.
Jujus, yeah. So I struggle with what Elon means by that, because I think he means the combination of FSD with human oversight better than a human. But that's already true. Like FSD plus a human is already safer than just a human. So I guess if that's true, then he must mean that like FSD with no human oversight at all would be better than a human. I'm a little bit tripped up on these linguistics that, to be honest with you, I've been a little confused about exactly what Elon does mean when he says that. But assuming he means like no human oversight is needed unless, say, the car alerts you. So if the car gets in a situation that it can't handle, then it would alert you, but it could like pull over to the side of the road safely or something, some situation like that. I think I would say like maybe a year from now would be my kind of best guess. So I'm giving like a 6 month lag, let's say, to what Elon's putting out there. Um, but my confidence is kind of low because Elon's bullishness seems really ramped up right now, and that makes me very excited. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it'll probably happen a little bit earlier, maybe beginning of next year, end of this year. But a 6 month time span on this kind of project literally doesn't matter because of its true potential. Like, who cares who's right in this scenario, right? I think the better than a human definition to me is a 100% a safety sort of measure. So better than a human to me means safer than a human, and because ultimately what you want to do is ensure that your passenger, or whoever's in the car, gets to point B as many times as humanly possible. And so if you're
Yeah,
better than a human at them doing that, then you've solved the driving problem. It's almost like the behavior of the car is secondary. It's all about getting you to point B. Now you might get there with some anxiety because the car is behaving in a different way than a human. But if they
yeah.
can prove that it's safer than a human, that to me already defines better than a human. So that's how I think about better than a human.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been thinking about
Yeah.
like the driver or the passenger experience of that. Like it does things that, to your point, kind of increase anxiety. But I think very quickly we're going to adapt to this point where we don't really care that it's driving in a erratic way or a different way than we would handle the same situation because we're going to be
Right.
watching Netflix or doing something else. So I think yeah, that behavior is going to be very interesting to see how
Yeah.
quickly that changes.
It's like no different than when you're a passenger in a car of someone who's driving the car whom you don't trust as much as yourself. But in this case, it's a computer, so you don't even know what it is. So, like, to me, the parallel is people that are nervous flyers, right? If you're
Yeah,
if you're in a plane, like, a significant percentage of that plane is nervous because they're like, okay, what if this thing drops? It just drops down to the ground and the air disappears or whatever. Like, there's a lot of anxiety to that. There's going to be a learning curve for FSD as well, but really what it comes down to is once the cost gets to a point where it's a no-brainer to take it, people are going to overcome their anxiety to ride in the FSD car. And then over time, people will just get used to the feeling of being in a driverless car. And then the anxiety will go away because they know that they'll get there safely. And that's how I
yeah,
view full self-driving long term.
definitely. Well, let's do one more question.
Can't believe it's over an hour already. It's
I
crazy.
know it goes fast.
Oh
All
my
right,
God.
Eric says, question: if FSD reaches robotaxi level, why would that not lead to GPT-3/4 drowning Twitter and other text-based networks in fake accounts with superhuman characteristics? Why buy Twitter then? Farzad, that's a bit of an off-the-wall question. What do you think about that?
Whoa. Hold on. Let me reread that. If full self-driving reaches robotaxi level, why would that not lead to GPT-3/4 drowning Twitter and other text-based networks in fake accounts with superhuman characteristics? Why buy Twitter then? Interesting. So we're making a parallel that says that the advancements of AI and the full self-driving stack also correlate to the fact that there's going to be a similar advancement in the GPT-3/4 world, in the case where if you have a full self-driving car that's better than a human, you would have a user on Twitter that's better than a human. So whatever that means, right? Dude, that's a great question. I don't know. I feel like I have to think about that because, like, it's almost like could you write some sort of characteristics in Twitter, or, like, your bot spam account would look for behavior that's better than a human. And GPT-3/4, somebody says, explains what it means. And Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically this software that generates human language that is very human like, and you can use that to sort of like simulate a conversation between humans. Correct me if I'm wrong there,
Yeah,
Matt.
so it was
Whatever.
developed by OpenAI, I believe, and it's shocking. Like it can come up with poetry that seems reasonable. It can like take on the voice of Trump or Elon Musk, not the literal voice, but the writing style and characteristics, and come like craft arguments and come up with like write papers and stuff. Like the capabilities of it today are staggering, to be honest with you. And they've even adjusted it to be able to write code and do some stuff in HTML that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. My thing here then, where my head goes, is AI safety. It's like, okay, that is a phenomenally good point, Eric. And I think that's why Elon should definitely buy Twitter, because then we'll have somebody that us as a community let's just use the word trust, has exposure to this sort of behavior, which is going to be extremely important to figure out how to handle for the sake of civilization's survival in the future, because you can very easily see how stuff like this could drive a tremendous amount of division, misinformation, misleading. So, you layer it. If you have something that it becomes extremely good at behaving like a human with its own agenda, or whoever created it has their agenda, and they optimize for reasonableness, or being able to get people to fall in line with what they're saying, that becomes extremely important to harness and figure out. And Elon is by far at the forefront of ensuring that that sort of AI safety exists. So to me, it means that Elon has to buy Twitter under that scenario. What do you think?
Yeah, but the only I would want to distinguish a little bit between like AI for like autonomy and robotaxis and kind of traversing through the real world, and the AI that's kind of backstopping GPT-3 and 4. I mean, those are both AI systems, but there's very little overlap between them. So when we talk about FSD reaching robotaxi level, I want to be clear that the audience knows that doesn't mean that like Tesla's AI stack would then go and be capable of infiltrating Twitter. Like those are very different AI systems, and the concept of artificial general intelligence, as far as I can tell, nobody's kind of near solving or even making significant progress on that, where one AI stack could solve both robotaxis and human techs. Like those are very different problems that are being solved with very different kind of methodologies. A lot of the same tools in the toolbox, but very different architectures that are underpinning them. So I think there may be some false equivalence potentially of saying that the rate of progress with FSD would have implications on GPT-3 and 4. But I do think that, like, honestly, even OpenAI having the capability for GPT-3 and 4 is like a little bit dangerous. If they just open source that, and well, it is open source, but if they let anybody use that to generate their own text or whatever, it could be a pretty dangerous weapon. They've done some like pilot things where you can do a few limited functionality kind of queries, and it'll spit out some stuff, and it's pretty fun to play around with that. But if they were malevolent players, that could be a very bad situation, to be honest with you. So I think AI safety, like you were saying, Farzad, is a really, really important point. And I think Elon owning Twitter would go a long way towards, I don't know how you solve it, honestly, if GPT-3 and 4 is like as good as that. Even if with the best of intentions, I don't know how you try to protect against that if somebody had that.
Yeah, so. I do think the overarching theme of, if something reaches superhuman level, what's stopping us from other things reaching superhuman level? And in the sense of discussion and infiltrating Twitter to drive agendas or whatever it may be, I think is super, super valid. And I think in the spirit of that conversation, we need problem solvers in those realms to really figure out how to harness that for the good of mankind, not for the betterment of the few, or whatever that means within that context.
Yeah, right? for the financial benefit of the couple creators that came up
agenda,
with that,
power, so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly. Great. Wow, what a question. I love that question. I love these like esoteric, weird, like abstract sort of things, dude. Like, it's like that's where my head goes all the time, and I spend way too much time there. My wife's like, "Be present." I'm like, "I can't." When you have questions like this, how can I? No, but she's right. I'm freaking.
I think we just occupied your headspace for the next 12 hours or so. So sorry to Farzad's wife.
Sorry, Cindy.
Yeah, who's making her debut on Twitter? It seems like we're seeing some more out of Cindy on there. So.
Yeah.
It's been good to see a little more of your personal life on there, Farzad.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Yeah, she's like, well, Elon's buying Twitter, so I'm gonna go on Twitter. I'm like, that's great. Jump on. Let's poop posts together.
You're filtering yourself a little bit too much. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Farzad for being guest host. I can't even talk anymore. My voice is done now. But thanks so much, Farzad, for coming on. Emmett will be back next week, but I'm sure we'll have another conversation before too long. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much for having. This was a blast. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Emmett. Appreciate you guys very much.